Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, it's official. We've hit and, in fact, surpassed the summer solstice, which starts the beginning, the authentic beginning, of the summer vacation here in the Carolinas. And, of course, nothing is finer, right? Welcome to the longest running and most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs. I'm Chris William, and as always, we are truly grateful for your support of this program over the years. Even though we may be drawn away by more entertaining pursuits during the summer months, the drumbeat of business does go on, and so will our dialogue. Later on, we're joined by someone who, through the arc of his career, has made media, creativity, and the arts an important business for himself, but more importantly, the region. He is outgoing UNC School of the Arts Chancellor, Lindsay Bierman. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Brenda Berg of Best NC, Nichole Myles from the Children's Museum of the Lowcountry, and special guest Lindsay Bierman, Chancellor of the University of North Carolina School of the Arts.
Welcome to our program, talking about important things like sports travel schedules and what the kids are going to do in the summer. I know, me too. I'm there with you. Welcome. Good to have you back, Brenda.
Great to be here.
Nichole, nice to see you. Thank you both for traveling. So May 1st, a few weeks ago now, in Raleigh and in Columbia, of course, the state capitals of both of Carolina, tens of thousands of teachers got together to make a point about teacher pay. And you could also say principal pay and pay in general in the school systems. Brenda, does that, it certainly is high drama, and it's you know, the media, we love it. Is it effective? Does it make a point for teachers and the schools and the pay, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you know what they say, all media coverage is good media coverage.
No such thing as bad press.
There's no such thing as bad press. Yeah. But and I think any opportunity any group has to really make themselves heard and make themselves known when you're right in the middle of a budget negotiation is going to be meaningful. There have been successive pay increases over the last 5 years, and so there's some conversation about, were they here to talk about pay? There were platforms on minimum wage for staff in the buildings. I think there were other topics that were also interesting that were brought to the table in this particular year. Yeah. But generally speaking, anytime we can raise awareness about the profession, I think we should do it. Best NC is involved in now a teacher recruitment campaign, also intended to raise the perception of the profession and awareness of how important teaching is.
Nichole, this is not demeaning what they do in any way. Is it more than a photo op or a video op or a social media op?
I think it certainly became more than a photo op, and these marches were part of a national trend of teachers really drawing attention to what's happening inside of our classrooms, and pay was part of that. But if you look at particularly the SC for Ed platform, it also included things like class size, which we know from research that smaller class sizes, especially in early years, are much better for children as they progress through education, and putting some caps and some attention to the fact that we have classrooms with 30, 32, 34 students in them was really something to bring attention to. And I think you did see some changes, even if we didn't get state legislation that all of the pieces that we wanted, there was a conversation, and several individual school districts, I think as a result of what they were seeing with 10,000 teachers in South Carolina and a second year of thousands of teachers in North Carolina marching, raised their base pay for their teachers to start to address that recruitment trend and keeping them in. So I think you have to give some credence to the fact that this is drawing attention and it's raising the conversation and getting some really important topics on what's happening in education out there.
So does it translate to incremental increase in teacher pay or pay in general? Would you say that happened?
In certain districts, it did.
Yeah.
I think it certainly afforded the conversation to say these are the challenges that schools and school districts are facing. And a lot of people, a lot of general constituents don't understand the intricacies of funding and state funding and local funding and the tax system. So it did give a platform for educators, for people to stop for a minute and try to find out what was happening.
Well, and North Carolina
Brenda.
has a different funding model. We pay our teachers at the state level.
Right.
So the conversation between the two states will be quite different. And our session's not over yet. So we don't know, the jury's out on whether there will be a teacher pay increase. That said, there have been a lot of efforts over the last 5 years. If you recall, during the recession, and because of the recession, we had a teacher pay freeze for 6 years. Teachers hadn't had a pay increase, and actually principals for even longer. So all of that energy around reminding the public that this is important definitely makes a difference. Whether or not it makes a difference this year for this particular rally is yet to be seen.
Well, so how would you handicap that, Brenda? Do you think there's a warming, a sympathizing of North Carolina General Assembly members to the idea of increasing the pay this year?
I don't know about this year. I again go back. There's been almost $1 billion teacher pay increase over the last 5 years. So what they'll do this year, I think there's a lot of pressure that state employees are looking for pay increases that they weren't getting while the teachers were getting pay increases. So I don't know exactly how that's going to play out this year. But going back again, we had some pay increases that were as high as 7% over the last couple of years. And I think aggregated it's somewhere around 25% teacher pay increases over the last 5 years. So regardless of what happens this year, there's already been a really strong appetite over the last couple of years.
You know, it's nice to hear that anecdotal evidence, because that is sometimes lost in the hyperbole of the dialogue. Surprise, surprise. Nichole, you know what, and both of you, I'd like to comment on this. So the other aspect of this idea of education, funding, teacher pay, however, the more global picture of education was that there's an inextricable link between education and economic development. Governor McMaster, in his State of the State at the beginning of this year, made this proposal to focus on rural areas to make tax credits more of a carrot to draw businesses to smaller towns, to give them a meaningful increase in tax credits if they did some relocation, and that would be directly attributable to schools, to infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So do we see a renewed vigor by General Assembly to say, wait a minute, let's revisit the idea of economic development and education? Do you see that in South Carolina?
I think we're starting to see some motion. It was a little bit of a surprise to see that motion come out of McMaster's State of the State. I think there's a lot of great deals that are made economically in the state of South Carolina. That's why you're seeing big businesses come to town. I think the piece that we're really going to have to start focusing on, though, is what didn't get the full funding and didn't get a lot of the backing we'd hoped for was early childhood education. And a lot of the things that we start to see go wrong in education or become barriers to good education happen before children are formally in school, in kindergarten. And so really starting to address that early childhood piece. When you look at workforce development, it has to start before they start at formal school. It really does. And so I think that's going to be the next step, that businesses that come to town are going to have to start addressing early childhood education and early childhood support, not only for their workforce who themselves are parents, but for that second generation of their workforce who are small children.
So Brenda, not to put words in your mouth, but I'll ask a question about this. So in North Carolina, the idea of policy around education was kind of blown out from the major business alliances, like the North Carolina Chamber decided they weren't going to make that a focus a few years ago. And now we see the resurgence of things like My Future NC and that commission. and it starts to be, and of course Best NC, Ed NC out there, My Future NC, and many others, are now taking a more specific laser-like focus. Does that have the intended effect? And does this idea of more closely tying education to economic development, is that also forefront?
Yeah, I think the business voice is critical. Frankly, anything that's been transformative in North Carolina, whether it's creating RTP or transforming our funding mechanisms during the Depression, the business community had a big say in it. So having this business voice, whether it's My Future NC or Best NC, the business roundtables really involved in early learning is going to be critical. These are not simple problems to solve. You can't just spend your way out of these issues. When North Carolina became the first state in the nation to have 5-year-olds go to school, we were the first state in the nation to have universal kindergarten. It was the business community that really helped the state see this as an economic driver. So it is really important that the business community stay involved and that there's a long-term vision, that it's not just quick fixes along the way.
And you both feel like most people, and we've got to move on here pretty quickly, but do you feel like most people understand this is a much longer term, 10, 20, 50 years?
I think some of the business communities certainly do, because longevity planning is part of what happens in businesses. But for local communities and for people involved in local communities, what you see is that cycle, right? Families have children in schools. They want to see something get fixed while their children are in school. And when you're talking about systemic problems, you are looking at 10, 15-year plans. Sure. Their children are going to be gone. So I think one of the pieces that is missing perhaps in the education community is that crossover business voice of being able to say these are long systemic challenges that we are facing with education and our pipeline. And when we fix it, we won't be fixing it for our children. We'll be fixing it for our children's children.
Thank you. We will talk about a business voice and education. We have one coming up, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Coming up on this program, in fact, John McConnell has a company called McConnell Golf. He has strung together some very high-end, nice golf courses to make that part of a syndicate to some degree. Also, we will take one whole program and talk about affordable housing because it's become an issue not just in the urban centers, but also in rural communities, as well as Dr. Patrick Cawley, the Chief Executive Officer of the Medical University of South Carolina, will also join us. Our guest has many talents, but seemingly just as many competencies. Over the last 5 years, he has used his formidable experience and his previous leadership roles to leverage that and manifest meaningful changes in this nation's first public arts conservatory, the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. We welcome Chancellor, at least for a few more days, Lindsay Bierman. Chancellor, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you back, sir. And I'm going to read something, and I hate to do that because it seems a little bit canned, but it's important to get this right. So, longtime media veteran, Chairman, if you don't mind me saying, 17 years at Time, editor-in-chief at Southern Living magazine, something we've all heard about there for a while, classically trained as an architect, undergrad at Georgetown, graduate school at the University of Virginia, and we'll just gloss over that one for now. With a little school fun there. But,
go Hoyas.
So Chancellor, here you are wrapping up a 5-year stint at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, ready to take on a new challenge. What is that thing that drives you? Is it creativity? Is it mission? Is it raising money? Is it just getting a whole bunch of people together? I mean, what is that thing that really drives you?
All of that. It's about impact. And the proudest accomplishments at UNCSA have been around impact. We've raised over $50 million in just a few years. And I started with basically no advancement office. We sort of built that operation from scratch. And then, so the scholarship dollars that we've raised have helped reduce the student debt, the burden of student loans. We've been able to get a number of capital projects going that were, the entire UNC system is facing very serious deferred maintenance issues, but we were able to get approved 2 weeks ago at the Board of Governors meeting, the go-ahead for new residence halls, which we have the original residence halls there, the Stevens Center, which is our 10-story performing arts building. It's home to the Winston-Salem Symphony, Piedmont Opera, National Black Theater Festival. That has been, the last time that was renovated was almost 40 years ago, and there's water coming in through the roof and, destroying the plaster. So The funding for that is still, it made it into the House budget. It's not in the Senate budget, but I feel cautiously optimistic that we'll get there. So, and there's a lot more on the list.
Yeah, I'm sure. Brenda?
Well, I'm so happy to meet you. Thank you for everything you're doing, and I'm really excited about your new role as well. When I look at the School of the Arts, you have one of the higher six-year graduation rates in the state, but there's still a percentage that are not making it all the way through. And it's, of course, the arts, you have famous actors and actresses who just went on to theater, but when we think of My Future and see in the work that they're doing on completion, right? What are you seeing as the biggest barriers to getting students all the way through to completion?
Usually that's a great question. I want to comment on the 6-year versus the 4-year graduation rate, because I think it's an important distinction. At UNCSA, students come in as a cohort in all of our conservatories. So we're really focused on the 4-year graduation, which I think is the 3rd highest in the UNC system. And we're very proud of that. That said, we continue to dedicate resources and set goals to improve that graduation rate. And usually, you can tell we've begun a student advantage program where we've identified students who are potentially at risk because of the grade point average that they have entering into the institution, where they grew up. So some of them have to matriculate into an environment that is incredibly intensive. And in some cases, they may have been, the greatest talent where they were coming from, and now they're surrounded by people like them, and that can lead to some self-doubt and some insecurity. And so I think people struggle with mental health issues. And so we've partnered with the JED Foundation to provide student support for mental health. And then financial support, I think, is a huge barrier for people. And so we've done everything we can to raise money and make more resources available through private support.
That's great.
Nichole?
It's wonderful. Lindsay, it was great to meet you backstage for a little bit. I know we exchanged some conversations about the fact that my first degree is in the arts. I have a real passion for it. I have a daughter with a degree, a Bachelor's of Fine Arts as well. But I'm wondering about not what happens when you get in, but how you get in. And at the very beginning, my specialty now is in early childhood and in those first formative years of life. We know that an arts education is so important, and in an era that's very focused on STEM. We've worked STEAM into the conversation, but what kinds of efforts do you see around UNC and in the future of how we can continue to fill that pipeline of talented, qualified creatives that are coming into these professions to continue to grow it and to really focus on the diversity that we're seeing more in the world? I'd love to see more of that. I think you, more than anyone as an architect, understand the intersection of STEM and the arts. But what can we be doing at those early childhood years to make sure you have this robust pipeline?
I think it's probably important to note, before I answer that question, that arts and cultural goods and services contribute $803 billion to the national economy. It's more than 5 times more than construction, agriculture, 5 times more than agriculture, and billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars more than construction, transportation, warehousing. So I do think that comes as a surprise to people. It is a sector of the economy and an industry that is rich with opportunity for graduates. At UNCSA, they have to, in many cases, they have prepared their entire since early childhood for the opportunity to audition or present a portfolio to get in. And so by the time they get there, they are already extremely focused on what they do after they graduate, or what they want to do after they graduate. So it's the entire institution is really focused on career readiness for this industry. And it's hard to define success in the metrics that are traditionally used. It's been a source of frustration for me, because I think you look up statistics about career placement, and it's typically 9-to-5 jobs and major corporations, and yet they're entering into what is essentially a gig economy, which I think is going to continue to increase in the future. And so they're building a career and building a portfolio gig by gig, project by project, and some of them will hit it big early on and get a huge movie deal. Or a big lead role on a Broadway show, and that's how it's done.
Well, an observation and then a question, sir. It was refreshingly candid to hear you talk about the mental health and inadequacy issues that students would face when they go to, you're in the varsity squad now, you need to be a self-starter, and here's what you need to do, so thank you for that. And the other thing is the student debt. Chancellor, is it overblown about the student debt burden? Is it under-talked about? How do you come down on student debt in this country?
Well, I am deeply grateful to the taxpayers of this state for their support of the University of North Carolina. And I'm reminding students of this all the time, a large percentage of your education here is supported by the generous taxpayers of the state. And all of us should be profoundly grateful for that. And because it has a tremendous, there's a tremendous return on that investment in terms of economic impact to the university system. And for that, we are able to offer a tuition that is, at UNCSA and at every institution in the UNC system, a tuition that is substantially less than rival institutions. So at UNCSA, for example, if you're applying to any number of rival programs, depending on the school, so if you're School of Drama, you're probably applying to UNCSA, Yale, and other institutions that have top drama programs. You know that Yale is, considerably more expensive than UNCSA. Fantastic program, no doubt. But it is, it's going to be close to $100,000, maybe not $100,000, but not far from that, all in.
Effectively, six figures.
Yeah. So we are extremely fortunate to be able to offer just a highly competitive tuition. That said, it is still any amount of money that a student has to pay, and it is in 2019 more than it was 30 years ago when my parents sent me to college. It is a huge financial burden to get the money for even a public school tuition. And I've heard numerous stories over and over again of students who are there on full scholarship support who would not otherwise have been able to go to college, which is why I have dedicated a significant part of my time and bandwidth on fundraising just to help those students.
Yeah, thank you. We have about 3 minutes.
I want to go back to go forward. You're about to take over heading up UNC TV, and I was mesmerized by what you did at Southern Living. You navigated tremendous change during the new media.
You know he can't get you a reduction in your subscription. You know that, right?
Well, it's okay. It was mesmerizing, and I was following it while all of these print magazines were disappearing, and yours was staying on the shelf, and you were leading it during that time. What are you going to take from that lesson into this new role?
Well, it's exciting to return to my roots in media. And stations like this one and UNC TV and all of the PBS affiliates all across the United States, I feel, are doing unequivocal good for the nation, in the work that they do for educating our youth and providing a safe educational environment for our nation's youth, connecting us more deeply to nature and our sense of place and pride of place as North Carolinians, I think is just really important work. And I'm very, and that's what we did at Southern Living, and so it feels like a homecoming of sorts. In fundraising, of course, all of us need, the sponsors are critically important. And so that work that I've done as a fundraiser will lead directly, will benefit UNC TV, I hope. That's the idea. But I'm really excited to go into an organization that will feel like a homecoming of sorts, and and to continue on and to work with, to collaborate with my peers at stations like this one and so many others across the United States. I'm really excited about it, and to collaborate with UNCSA as well. We have a School of Filmmaking.
That's right. You get to leverage some of that. We have literally a minute. You got a quick question?
I want to ask you a little bit about that fundraising and marketing piece, since we are a room full of nonprofits. And we're in a capital campaign ourselves. So that value proposition piece that you've leveraged really well at UNC, and I think you're going to be carrying with you. What would you say about that value proposition in the arts and in things that are less tangible in terms of metrics? What kinds of words of wisdom can you give us as nonprofits and fundraisers?
We spent over a year developing a case statement, which has some very powerful language about why what we do matters. And I think it just, whatever it is, whatever organization you're working for, you got to grab them by the heart. It's an emotional connection. And I think with the next generation of supporters, millennials in particular. Everybody seems to be, millennials care about social impact, and they are willing by a wide margin to support organizations that have a social impact. So if you can define that in a quick elevator pitch, I think that's the first most important thing to do.
And we'll get to see you in action, I suspect.
Hopefully, yes. Soon.
Congratulations
Thank
at
you.
UNCSA. How proud I know you are, and those that know you well. At the very bottom, the last line of your bio, Mr. Chancellor, it says, training diligently to qualify for Men's USA Masters weightlifting. You look great. Do you want to run for governor of California? What's going on with that?
Schwarzenegger was a bodybuilder, and I'm an Olympic weightlifter, so I'll never look like him. But I am chasing after qualifying totals.
That's very exciting.
Yep.
It's something else to watch. Thank you for being on the program. Nice to see you. Thanks, Nichole. Good to see you, Brenda. Good night. Until next week.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.